My name is Cassie, and I want to just let you know a little bit about myself. Um, I am married to a law enforcement officer, a Fargo police officer, um, but I've also done a lot of work myself that has brought upon secondary and original type stress and trauma. And so I became really interested in this topic when I discovered that I was in a training and I learned that secondary trauma is actually a thing. I just kind of always thought I was just, you know, I wasn't tough enough, or I was having difficulties and I needed to have thicker skin, things like that. Um, the only problem was that every trauma training I ever went to just addressed the fact that there is secondary stress. And it didn't tell me what to do and how to help myself and how to help my husband and how to help my friends. It was just like, okay, you're going to go through this, so do something about it. Well, it wasn't very helpful to me. Uh, so um, Working in the mental health field, I put together a lot of my own learnings and put them into this presentation, and I hope you guys all enjoy it. I'm going to start off with a quote, and this quote is, "The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water and not get wet." Basically, what that's saying is we are not going to be able to stay dry. We know this. Um, like I said, we have a lot of dispatchers and paramedics on the line right now, and every one of you is experiencing trauma, whether it's secondary trauma or whether it's primary trauma. And, secondary trauma are things like listening to people talk about what had happened to them in the past, or, learning about it even on the news, or being that 911 caller or dispatcher that's hearing things happen. You're not there, it's not happening to you, but that is that secondary trauma. And then we have fire and law enforcement who are, you know, running into a burning building, or having to become physical with somebody. That's a lot of primary trauma. We are not going to be able to stay dry. We are not going to be able to keep ourselves from being affected. So we know we're exposed. We're used to it. So what? Well, the same person that gave us that quote, her name is Dr. Rachel Remen, and she also said that this sort of denial, this saying, so what? I know I'm exposed. What does it matter? It's not a small matter. It's not anything to just scoff at. If you find yourself thinking things different than what you express, like you might be thinking, oh my gosh, people are so stupid. You're a dispatcher and you're about sick of having these 911 calls that aren't really 911 calls, and it's driving you up the wall. Or you have another headache. Why am I always getting these headaches? Or thinking every day, even after you get back from a vacation, boy, I need a vacation. If you find yourself forgetting conversations, rolling your eyes at people who just have absolutely no idea what it is you do and how hard it is. If maybe you've been losing your hair, that actually happened to me while I was in the midst of working with high-risk youth. I was actually losing my hair. But on the outside, you're saying, I got this, it's just my job, someone's got to do it. I think that you might be in that denial state. And so why does any of this matter? Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit into some science with you. I'm not going to go too deep because the brain is something that's not fully mapped out and nobody fully understands it, but these are things that we know. So all of us have heard of PTSD, I would probably say. Post-traumatic stress disorder. What does that do to our brain? So there's three main things that actually happen to a brain of a person that has post-traumatic stress disorder. They have an overstimulated amygdala. So the amygdala is this small part of our brain that it identifies threats, and then it links our memories to emotions. So when you think about what that is saying, something that is perceiving threats, but also linking memories and emotion together, trauma can really cause our amygdala to get stuck in a really bad cycle. It's an active state, and then it makes us think that anything could be a threat, even where no threat exists. So this is why somebody might remain jumpy or really on edge after going through a traumatic event, like being attacked, or even, you're maybe watching a scary movie and you jump, but your heart is still racing a few minutes later and you're like freaked out to go walk over to the fridge, right? Because it's dark and it's scary and something else might jump out at you. Our amygdala is in that stuck state. The next thing that also happens is our hippocampus. So there are certain stress hormones that actually kill cells in the hippocampus. And if you look at people's brains who have PTSD and people's brains who don't have PTSD, that hippocampus can be smaller, and you can see the effects. So the hippocampus impacts the way we establish our memories. And so our mind and body don't always recognize the difference between memories and current events. So this is why somebody with PTSD might have flashbacks when they come across a certain sound or smell or experiences. I think of my grandfather, who was in World War II. During the 4th of July, he would go hide in the basement from the fireworks just because it really brought those sounds brought him back. And so that was his hippocampus tricking his body into thinking that he was actually there. So the third thing that happens is called ineffective variability. So when the amygdala and the hippocampus are constantly in these states, our sympathetic nervous system is always on high alert. Our body's ability then to our body's ability to regulate itself is diminished. So that can cause a lot of exhaustion if our heart rate is constantly up high. Our organ systems can start to fatigue, and so this can lead to not only like the mental illnesses, but physical illnesses as well. So, okay, all of that is PTSD in our brain. What does PTSD look like in general? People re-experiencing events that aren't actually happening, but they're so real in that person's mind. People avoiding situations that might trigger that event. Constant states of hyperarousal, somebody who seems maybe kind of twitchy or, in large groups, really looking around and really concerned that something is going to happen. And then negative thinking. Obviously, if you're having all of these other experiences, getting into a negative thought process is pretty simple to see why somebody would fall into that, and depression. Okay, so that's PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, caused by things that we think of as major events and things that we think of as not just perceived stress, but not just perceived trauma, but things that have actually happened to the person, not this secondary stress that most of us go through, right? Well, back to science. So what they're starting to figure out, scientists is my they here, is that in the effects of like prolonged contact in professional roles, such as yours and mine, with trauma victims that we're listening to, has the same effect on our brains as PTSD. They're seeing this by actually looking at brain scans of people who have secondary traumatic stress experiences and who have initial stress or traumatic stress experiences. And this has gone, there's so much science behind this that now there's actually the diagnosis of secondary traumatic stress disorder. So what I'm saying is this is an actual thing with actual science behind it. And this is why sometimes we might feel like maybe I do have like PTSD, because they're directly linked. What does this mean in layman's terms? Basically, this means that our brains do not know the difference between perceived trauma and actual trauma. I'm going to say that again. Our brains do not know the difference between secondary trauma, trauma we're hearing about, trauma we're experiencing secondhand from somebody else, and actual traumatic situations. Our brains do not know the difference. I'm going to give you an example. I need to take a quick drink of water first. Okay, my example is, maybe you could raise your hands, use the little chat or the little hand raising here. If any of you have had a dream about your significant other who has done something really stupid or really bad, maybe cheated on you or left you, and you wake up in the morning and you're so angry, you just can't get over it. You're furious. We've got one hand up. I know there's more of you out there. And you got to remind yourself, right? Like, oh my gosh, this isn't real. This didn't really happen. I don't need to be angry. My significant other didn't do anything wrong. Why does that happen? Because our brains don't know the difference. It was a dream. It wasn't real, but our brain thought of it as being real. So was it just a dream? Yes, it was just a dream. There's probably 1,000 other experiences we can think of where our brain really tricks us into thinking something is real. But that can be good, but it can also be dangerous, right? All right, so now that we know all of this, we know our brains are tricking us. We know our brains maybe aren't always the smartest. They don't know the difference between reality and, and what's perceived reality. What are we going to do? Firefighters, you still need to run into that burning building. Law enforcement officers, you still need to go and talk to a victim. You still maybe need to arrest somebody and it might get physical. Dispatchers, you still need to take those difficult calls, and your brain isn't going to really be able to tell the difference between it happening to you or you listening to it happening. So what are we going to do? Well, we get a lot of advice from all of our friends and our family and people who really don't know us at all and don't know what they're talking about. They want to tell us, go to counseling, talk to somebody, let your feelings out. Right. I love this picture of this guy because, I don't really think he wants to go tell somebody how this makes him feel. I don't think that's really the right spot for him. He needs some real advice as to how to work with, the idea that he needs to wear a helmet and a bulletproof vest to work every day just to keep safe, right? So we get that. We get people giving us all this advice, but then we also get the judgment. What about that sense of humor of yours, right? So I gotta tell you, I think this picture is really funny, but the picture I wanted to use, I didn't think was maybe quite appropriate, but I'm gonna tell you about it anyway, because it was hilarious in my mind, because I have this kind of sense of humor. The other picture was actually the same dog, and he had a mannequin's leg in his mouth. So he was carrying this leg, and it just, the leg looked kind of realistic, and my type of sense of humor where I come from, it was really funny. But that's what I'm saying. People don't always get our sense of humor. Some things we have to laugh at or we're going to cry about, right? So we got people judging us. We've got people telling us we need to go to counseling, that we need to, do all of these other things. And then they really just don't get it. And in my case, I get that girl just ain't right. Not that boy just ain't right. They just don't get where I'm coming from. All right. So we're getting a lot of information or a lot of suggestions from people that are about as helpful as pedestrians being active or being in an active scene, right? I love this picture because these people are just walking through this like it's a regular Tuesday afternoon, and y'all are trying to get in there and do your work. We've got 2 ambulances, it looks like, fire department, law enforcement. There's lights and stuff all over. These guys are just walking through like it's no big deal, right? Well, not only do we have people who think that they're our friends and family who, well, that are our friends and family, but think that they know what's best for us, telling us what to do. We also have ourselves that are telling us ourselves what to do, things that aren't necessarily very helpful. So don't blame me, I'm just the messenger, but all of us do these things, a lot of these things anyway. And in excess, most of them are really not helpful to us. All right, so we've got some filler behaviors. Eating in excess, exercising in excess, shopping, gaming, social media, all of these things done in excess really aren't caring for ourselves and really aren't helping us cope with all of the stresses from our jobs. My go-to here that I do, that I'll admit that I do these things as well that aren't so good for you, is eating in excess. For a while, I was living off of coffee and chocolate to deal with my stress. And it was not helping me at all. But, you know, in my mind, it kind of, oh, I felt so good, right? Now, don't get me wrong. All of these things can be okay in moderation, but they're not really helping us, helping ourselves. And I'm trying to avoid using that nasty term self-care if you can't figure that out. They're really not caring for yourself. Things like smoking, self-mutilation, and self-medicating, those are always bad for you. There are a lot of people who do those things. And I'm not here to judge if you are one of those people. I'm just telling you the truth that it's not good for you. All right, so those are filler behaviors. Removing type behaviors. So this is where we're trying to avoid or take things out of our life to reduce the stress that we have. Sleeping in excess is not good for us. Refusing to disclose, so really not talking about it to anybody, builds up. Eventually you're gonna blow. Excluding those types of people who don't work in the same services we do, the emergency services. You know, I know personally, I know a lot of law enforcement officers who really only hang out with other law enforcement officers. What I'm seeing with them is that they tend to only see the worst in people because they're hanging out with their buddies that have those same experiences. They're not hanging out with people who do work in areas where you might see the best in people. So you're only getting kind of one side of the coin with that. It's always bad for you to shut out loved ones and to not eat, to completely remove things out of your world. And then we have the extreme behaviors, and I really hope that none of you are involved in any of this, but if you are, there's always help. There's always help around, and you can reach out to Project Renew or to somebody else that you know and trust to get help with these. And I beg of you, please do this. If you self-medicate with illegal drugs or with drugs that are acquired illegally, if you binge drink, if you do things that are some of these filler activities but might lead to illegal activity like drinking and driving, if you fight, like get into physical fights, things like that, please reach out. I'm going to ask you again at the end, and I'm going to give you some different ways, different places that you can get help if you need that help. Okay, so these are all of the horrible things that most of us do, at least a couple of these things, and I'm telling you that they're not helping you at all, right? Okay, so then Cassie, what are we supposed to do if we're not supposed to drink coffee and eat chocolate when we feel depressed, right? All right, well, we will get into that. And now I am going to use that horrible term that none of us like, self-care. And I'll tell you why I don't like this term. Because every time somebody tells me to use self-care, I get told I'm doing it wrong. I get told that that list of things that I was just using as self-care, like shopping and eating chocolate and binge watching Netflix and all of those things, that's not self-care. So what is self-care? Self-care is honestly taking care of you. We have all of these stressors, whether they're perceived stress or they're secondary stress or they're, you know, actual traumatic events happening to us through our jobs. We have all of these things happening to us. We're taking care of so many other people and so many other things, and we're ignoring our own bodies and our own minds and our own souls and our own relationships. So I'm going to say yes, self-care. Here we go. So I call this slide self-care for people who hate bubble baths and candles, because I hate bubble baths and candles. That does not make me feel better to take a bubble bath and burn candles and do those types of things. I think this gentleman here who's getting his facial thinks he's giving himself self-care, which actually I would call that more of self-indulgence. It's nice, you can do that for yourself and it can feel good, but we're going to get back to the basics and actual care. So breathing. I forget to breathe when I get really stressed out. I think a lot of people kind of do. Our bodies need oxygen, right? Our cells need oxygen to function. It's like our basic need here. We can go without a lot of things, but it's only a few minutes before we die without oxygen, right? So breathing. If you need to remind yourself, listen to yourself breathe. Do 4 square breathing. That's where you breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold it for 4 seconds, you breathe out for 4 seconds, and then you breathe normal for 4 seconds. So it makes like a square, 4 square breathing. Sleeping, our bodies really need sleep, an appropriate amount of sleep, not too much, not too little. I have this thing where I wake up at 2 o'clock every single morning. Well, finally I decided that I needed some medication to help me sleep through the night. I feel a lot better when I sleep through the night and don't wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and stay awake for 2 more hours. I had to go to the doctor. I had to admit that I was struggling. I got some medication. I'm better. Some people can fix that kind of thing with like habits and routine. So getting yourself into a really good habit and really good routines is important. I just mentioned, getting on some medication for sleep. Visiting your primary care physician. If you don't have one, get one. So you have a regular person you talk to about your physical health. If you need medications, take your medications. Eating well, unfortunately, chocolate and coffee is not a good diet. So I added blueberries into my diet. One item. Okay, I do eat more than just those 3 things. But when I added blueberries, you can add whatever it is you want, but it was something healthy and oh my goodness, it really does feel good. So, add some things to your regular diet. I just saw a couple things that popped up about I will go back to this before I finish the self-care here. So one of you asked, do people hang out because of personality matches? And when this was, I believe, probably when I was talking about certain like groups of like law enforcement who only hang out with law enforcement officers. Absolutely. And it is super important to hang out with people and to spend time with people that you have personality matches with and that you agree with on different topics and that get you as a person. But it's also important to not exclude other people that maybe you used to hang out with or that are from, that are spouses or, things like that. It's really important to not just isolate yourself. So you're absolutely right. It's super important to continue those relationships and they can be really good for you too. So I'm sorry if that sounded a little bit more like I was saying that you should exclude or you should, not only hang out with one type of person ever. I hope that explained that a little bit. If not, put another thing in the chat. That was awesome. And I will get to that as well. Okay. Back to self-care for people who hate bubble baths and candles. Exercising. I hate exercising, but getting up and moving around a little bit is good for you. Hygiene. So I've been working from home for quite a while and, eventually you just don't want to get out of your sweats because you know, I'm taking crisis calls and talking to people who are suicidal, and it's really difficult. And it's just much easier to sit in my sweats. And it's important to at least, you know, do those bare minimum, take a shower, those kind of things. And then being mindful of your tension. So most people hold tension somewhere in their body. Mine is like in my neck. And so I try to be mindful of, am I clenching up? Is my posture bad or good? Am I scowling? Those kind of things, because it creates tension in your muscles, which then you can become a little unbalanced. If you've ever been to either a chiropractor or a physical therapist, they'll talk about how your entire body is connected, right? So taking that time to relax yourself and to make sure that you're not tensing up can really help not getting headaches and different stress kind of aches. All right, so more about some self-care. Self-care for people who dread talking about feelings. All right, here's some really easy things that you can do. The first one is debriefing your tough calls. Whether you're, you know, a law enforcement, fire, whoever, I've noticed that when people actually debrief calls, when you start debriefing that call, you might look around and see people are kind of shaky. Their voice might be a little bit shaky. You know, we go back to the brain, and your hippocampus and your amygdala are really ramped up right now. Debriefing a call not only helps with you writing your reports and doing those kind of things, but it gives you your sequencing of events. And then that helps your brain plan to move forward. And so you're not talking about your feelings and the mushiness and the, oh, this hurt my heart and I felt sad and in those, you're not doing that. You're just talking about strict facts. Your brain then can say, okay, that was the past and now we're moving forward. By the time people are done debriefing, you might notice the voice isn't as shaky anymore. You're not in that sense of arousal as much. Another thing is laughing, and that is contagious and it's very good for you. Having fun, this one is great. And I have a really good example, actually was given to me by my friend Terry. And so she has a park close by where she lives, and she takes her kids for walks all the time. And she always sees these two women, probably in their 60s or so, and they walk to the park and walk past the park. But every once in a while, they will be swinging on the swings. And I think that this is probably something that they used to enjoy a lot, and what a great stress reliever for them. So thinking of something you used to enjoy when you were a kid and trying it again can be a huge stress reliever. Hanging out with animals is another one. And this picture I think is great because, you know, Johnny Cash, he's got to be one of the toughest guys that's ever lived, right? He's holding a kitty, and look at him. He looks like he's like just super chill and happy and enjoying this cat. So if you're not allergic to animals, you know, hanging out with animals can be really a good thing for you. It's especially fun when they're not your own because you don't need to clean up after them. So I think that's always better, right? You don't have to worry about feeding them either. And again, listening to yourself breathe. So if you were to go to Headspace, either on Netflix or there's an app, it's a really great series on Netflix if you don't want to like commit to having it as an app on your phone. But it really talks about listening to yourself breathe. And yes, it talks about meditating, but not like you need to sit cross-legged and hold your hands like this and, you know, make weird noises or anything like that. It's like the real way of meditating. So there's a couple of other apps, and I'll get to those later, but more for people who dread talking about feelings. Okay, gratitude. Gratitude is another really great way to deal with the stresses of life. I've been doing this myself actually lately, is taking what is a stress and trying to find the positive part of that. But if you can write down a few things that you're thankful for each day, send random texts to your friends that you haven't talked to in a little while, maybe. you know, just doing little things like that actually feels really, really good. And it can be a really good stress reliever. I do want to warn you though, for those of you who don't want to journal, that writing down things you're thankful for each day could be considered journaling. So you might want to watch out for that. Finding hope is another good way to deal with the stresses that we all in these professions go through. It can be really difficult to find hope when all we see is a lot of really bad things and hear a lot of really bad negative things. But being specific about what we feel needs to improve in our lives or in the world and making tangible goals to try to fix those or try to change things. It is a learned behavior, finding hope, but it can be learned. So that's good news. And I have a whole nother presentation on that. If any of you are ever interested, just let me know. Leaning on your faith. And this doesn't need to be organized religion faith. For me, it is, but not for, you know, it is not for everybody. Whatever your faith or beliefs might be, really leaning on them, especially when you're most stressed. And then the final one I have here really, really is going to therapy. And honestly, I think everybody should at some time in their life go to therapy. I hope you all enjoy this picture I have here. If anybody remembers Bad Boys and Bad Boys 2 and Bad Boys Forever, some of my favorite movies, this woosah. It's great. It makes me look a little goofy, but I don't care. It's awesome. Here Marcus Burnett says, no cap, remember your pressure points. Woosah. In that scene, the captain was just losing it. He was angry. And of course, Marcus was trying to get him to calm down a little bit. But I think that movie actually sums up therapy quite well because it allows us to kind of make fun of it a little bit, but also know that it's really important if you don't have other people to talk to go get, you know, just let out some of your stresses to somebody who does not know you at all. It's great. All right. More self-care. This is relationship care for people who carry the burden. I am pausing here because this is all of us. And this is very important. It is not our responsibility to carry all of the burden in the world. It is not always our responsibility to protect all of our loved ones from what we see and hear. Taking time for yourself and taking time to be with those people who really, really care about you. It can be a balancing act because yes, we need to take time for ourselves to decompress some of these horrors that we go through at work. On the same hand, we have loved ones who really do want to support us and help us. A lot of times they just don't know how. A lot of times they say really stupid things. My younger sister, I love her to death, but I cannot talk to her about stresses of my work, especially, you know, when I worked at a children's advocacy center, and I worked with children who were sexually and physically abused, and I worked with their families. And generally there was, you know, a lot of generational stress and generational abuse. When I try to talk to her, because she, you know, we were very close, and I'd say something like, I had a really difficult day at work today. Well, at the time she worked in the mall, and she would tell me about customers who were just being rude, or she couldn't help somebody, or she, you know, got yelled at a little bit from somebody who didn't like the item, or, you know, it rang up wrong or something. until your bad day includes somebody died or somebody was traumatically injured. You might not understand what a real bad day at work is, right? But I know she wanted to support me. So I had to do a balancing act with her. I had to know when I could talk to her and what I could talk to her about and what I couldn't. And eventually I just told her, you know, I don't want to hear about your work anymore, because it's difficult for you, but it's frustrating for me to hear that that's your difficult day. I still take time to be with her, and I love her, and we just talk about other things at the time. Being honest with yourself is another really, really important way to take care of yourself. So if you're mindful of your feelings, remember at the beginning, I had a slide that talked about you tell yourself, you know, you hear yourself saying things in your mind, but you're telling yourself other things out loud, like, I'm tough, I can take care of this, this is my job, what else did I expect? Be mindful of that, because you're covering for some things that are deep down inside, okay? When you need to reach out to somebody, it's really important to do that. Being honest with others. So some of you are really going to get a kick out of this little story I have about my husband, who is, like I said, he's a Fargo police officer. Forever, I wanted to go on a ride along with him. And this was actually before our kids were born or anything. I asked him all the time, I want to go on a ride along, I want to go on a ride along. And he kind of put me off. And finally he said, well, you can't go on a ride along anymore, because you have to be somebody who is planning on going into law enforcement or dispatch or something like that in order to go on a ride along. It's a new policy. They don't want us just taking our friends or wives or anything anymore. And I was bummed. I'm like, oh, bummer, you know. Well, a few years later, after he'd been perpetuating this story to me, I find out from a friend of mine, she's talking, and her husband's also a Fargo police officer, and she's like, oh, the other day I was on a ride along and this happened and that happened. And I was like, what? How were you on a ride along? How did that come about? And she's like, what do you mean? I go on ride alongs every once in a while, and, you know, just go on a ride along. Yeah, so my husband was lying to me, obviously, and I believed him. So I was furious. And when I got home, I laid into him. I'm like, you lied to me about this. And I was just, you know, I was outraged, because we are very honest with each other across the board. Well, the reason why he lied was because he was trying to protect me, because he's one of these people who carries the burden. He did not want me to see him have to arrest somebody, have to yell, have to pull his gun, have to, you know, be this kind of other person, because he's a sweetheart all the time. He didn't want me to see that side of him. And he was worried that if anything would have happened to me during a ride along, he would never have been able to forgive himself. It took him about 3 years to actually tell me that. He was not being honest with me. That did not necessarily help our relationship. He thought he was protecting me, right? So there are times where we just can't talk to our partners, our friends, our families about specifics. But like I said, when I was talking about my younger sister, I became really honest with her. Another person I can't talk to about things like this is my mom, because she worries unbelievably and she holds all of that. So I tell her, you know, I tell these people, I can't talk to you about this. It was a really bad day at work, but I can't tell you why. Being honest, it goes a long way for your relationships. Boundaries. So it's not always possible for us to leave work at work. I know we all know this. We want to just say, yep, I'm clocking out, I'm going home, that's back there, this is here. It doesn't work like that when we're working with people, when we're working with human beings that are going through trauma. It doesn't work like this when you get injured at work. You cannot leave that behind. If you're a firefighter and you're injured in a fire, whether it's, from inhalation or burns or, something falls on you, whatever it might be, you can't just leave that at work. Somebody threatens your life as a law enforcement, you can't just leave that at work. When I was at the Children's Advocacy Center, seeing little kids who've been horribly abused, couldn't just leave it at work. But you got to remember, you're not an island. So there are other people that you can lay that burden on. Sharing a case with somebody, like actually the responsibilities of the case, working together. Remembering you're on a team. You're not the only one who maybe witnessed that child who was abused, right? It's okay to let things go and give yourself those boundaries. It's okay to not let them get in the first place in order to be able to protect yourself. Trust that your loved ones really want what's best for you. Tell them what they need and trust that they've got your back. If you need space for the day and you need to tell your spouse or your significant other, I just really need some alone time. This is all about work and the stresses I'm feeling. It's not about you and me. I just really need a little alone time. Give them some credit. They'll probably understand. And if not, then there's more to work out. Or if, maybe you need somebody to take you to the doctor. Or maybe you need somebody to help you have a healthier diet or help you have a better sleep patterns. Trust that they're there to help you because you would do the same for them. And another one that I have here, and I know there's tons more than this, but code words. So this is something that can, if you communicate it, it can really, really be helpful. Okay, so it's a way of letting somebody know how you feel without saying how you feel. Okay, so you have this conversation when you're in a really normal mood. There's nothing, traumatic going on. There's nothing fantastic going on. Just one of those average days. And you say, hey, I think if we set up a system for when I get off a shift and it was a horrible shift, for me to let you know that it was a horrible shift before you jump at me with something or before you start talking about your day. And you can do this vice versa, right? So my husband and I actually have a look that we give each other when he gets home from work. If it was one of those days, I know he doesn't need to say a code word or anything. I just know. And then when he's ready, he'll talk to me about whatever that is. So I give him a little bit of space. My friend and I, this is really kind of inappropriate. If you're a faith-based Christian person like me, it's highly inappropriate. But when I worked at the Children's Advocacy Center, she lives in Chicago. I'm in Fargo, and she works in the healthcare field, and she works in inner city Chicago and sees a lot of horrific things and a lot of children who've gone through abuse and things like that. So we would just call each other after work, and without even saying hello, all we would say is, there's a special place in hell. And I know that's not funny, but it is funny. It was our way of saying, I saw a kid who was really, really, really abused today. And that special place in hell is obviously for the person that did the abuse. And we would just know then. We didn't even need to really talk about it. It was just a way for us to let out, it was really, really bad. I might need to talk about it later. So code words is a good way to just kind of communicate without having to get in deep with what's going on. Earlier, I mentioned that there were some resources. I have them up on the screen here. But if you have any questions or need me to go back to a different slide, we have about 10 minutes here. Or any comments, just go ahead and put them in the chat, and I'm more than happy to address them or answer questions, or if I don't know the answer, I will find the answer for you and get back to you another time. So I'll give us just a couple minutes here, and I believe, Terry, am I able to share these slides with people? Terry, are you still on? She might not be on anymore. I have to ask for permission from the state to share the slides, but especially this last one that has the resources, I think is really, really important. It is also important to know that Project Renew, our phone number there, the 223-1510, by June, that is going to start, we're phasing out of this program because it's a temporary program put on by the state for COVID response, but we answer calls for lots of things. So, but that will be phasing out. So we have the 237-TALK, 211-235-SEEK, Headspace that I told you about. COVID Coach is another thing that's really, really great. And this is an app that I have on my phone. It's a free app. And it was created by Veterans Affairs, so the VA. And it's interesting because it says it's COVID Coach, but within it you find a lot of things for veterans as well. I am not a veteran, but I find everything in there extremely helpful. So it's to address PTSD, secondary traumatic stress disorder, and then stress is caused by COVID. And it's an amazing app. So I really, really highly recommend that as well. Well, we have about 8 minutes, so I think I could give you guys 8 minutes back, unless at the last second there's anybody who has a question, wants to raise their hand or a comment. All right. Well, I hope you were able to take at least something from this that can help you. Oh, we do have somebody who's writing something, so I'll talk while that person's writing. Oh, it was a thank you. And thank you for coming. I really appreciated it. So yes, if you were able to take at least one thing from this, not everything works for everybody. And some things work for others, you know, that don't work for, something might work for you that I didn't think of. And that maybe doesn't work for me. So I hope you were able to take something from this, hope you were able to learn a little something. There's a lot of brain research out there. If you know, it's a big wormhole you could end up going down, or a rabbit hole you could end up going down. So thank you again. I hope you all have safe and not too stressful shifts in the near future. And I hope to talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.